Good morning, Jim Hennager, Table Talk, New Independent Party. Had to switch sides today on the table. The sun was coming in too bright, and I don't know what it's going to do here in the window behind me. I have this man-eating plant right above me, so say something if it's coming after me. Okay. Today I'd like to get into one of the last topics. I had thought there would be 20 of these sessions. We've now done 20. Today would be 21, and I have one more that I'd really like to get into. So today is session 21. It's December 31st. I had hoped to have these sessions videos done by the end of 2015, which is today. So I may end up doing both of the last two today. Today we're going to talk about an issue that again is just one of those emotional topics for people, and either you get it or you don't get it is kind of the way I have seen it develop with people. And just to give you some idea of my own background, I grew up in a very small town, Stanley, Iowa, maybe a couple hundred people there. And I didn't see anybody of color, until I was 12 or so, and we went to Waterloo to, have my trombone fixed. And that was the first time I saw Afro-Americans in a restaurant, and this was 1963, maybe something like that. And there was a sign in the back of the restaurant that said white fountain and Negro fountain, and then the same thing for restrooms. And I asked my dad about it, and he said, well, that's from prejudice. I didn't really know at the time, but my dad had served in World War II and in the Navy, and he was I guess you'd call him a drill sergeant. He pushed companies. He would pick up sailors coming in Chicago and ride a railroad to San Diego, where he would instruct them in how to march and how to swim. And all of the units that he had, and I didn't realize this till later, were all black companies. So here was my dad, who's probably 5'9", round-faced, bald kind of fellow, pushing all black companies for several years in San Diego. And my mother later told me that his companies won a number of awards and were featured in parades there in San Diego, and maybe even the Rose Bowl one year. So he had a background in racial relations. He never would talk about it. He never would say one way or the other. My mother indicated that there were times when he had a lot of difficulty. Sometimes people pulled knives on him. Sometimes they refused to jump in the pool and he had to throw them in. And there were just a lot of incidents that he had. So he never really talked about it. I never really got a flavor from him, one way or the other. And it wasn't until I met some black ball players on Little League in Iowa City. My dad was going to graduate school every summer. And I remember a fellow that played second base. I played out in the outfield. He was a very nice fellow. We got along very well. I stayed in touch with him for several years. So that was my first experiences with somebody from a different skin color, basically. In college, I lived in the international dorm for a while until I actually got kicked out for cooking. We weren't allowed to cook in there. Everybody was supposed to eat at the food service. I actually worked for the food service for several years, but this summer they were, in a smaller number of people. So I had about 5 jobs, part-time jobs. One of them was selling pots and pans. So I had my pots and pans and a heating pot, and I was cooking soup or something, and in walked the dean. Out I went. But I got to know a number of international students in that time, and I never had any problems with any of them. I felt very comfortable that they had the same interest in education that I did, and I remember that experience as an adult, family. I worked with an international exchange program, trying to identify homes for students to come over for short visits and longer ones. We had a student from France live with us all summer. She spoke no English, so it was very interesting. We didn't speak any French, but we made do basically with sign language. In graduate school in sociology, I did my master's thesis in the changing role of women in America. So I picked up a sensitivity to the women's issues, how the roles have changed over the years from the 50s and 60s, when we had very traditional ideas about what a man and a woman were to do in society. And I've seen, in the last 60, 70 years, a lot of changes in the role of women and the role of men, which has lagged for the most part. I'm probably a pretty strong feminist for equal rights in women. I see no differences between, what they can do and what everybody else can do. I've worked with a number of very competent women, and I'm very pleased to call them friends. So I got sensitive to the sexual kinds of role playing that we have in our society, and I see that we still have a long ways to go in that area. We don't have complete equality of pay for women. There's still a glass ceiling, and I've seen that. I also remember the studies that show that women that get to the top actually follow a very distinct path. They almost always have a father who supports them as a girl and treats them as an equal. These would have been professional men who took their daughter to work, taught them how finance works, how banking works, how accounting works, how architecture works. So they got to see the real world, when they were 10, 12, 14 years old. And in many cases, these young girls at that age were actually picking out what graduate school they wanted to go to, mainly because of the influence of their parents. The father played a very significant role for young girls, and the mother was there as a supportive. And almost always, the mother was a professional woman in herself. So I saw that pattern develop. And today, we see it in different ethnic groups in the United States who are very successful, and one of the most successful are children of Japanese parents who have come here, and they've brought with them a very strong work ethic, very disciplined in their goals, and they hold education very high. So in the United States, I think the last figures I saw, where the average per capita family income was maybe about $52,000, you have Japanese families up there at $58,000 to $60,000, almost 10,000 higher than the average. And Asian families like Chinese and Vietnamese and Philippine families are, between the average and the high as well. And then, again, it's because the husband and wife both work. They both are in professions like doctors and attorneys and engineers, where they make the most money, So it's obviously deliberate that certain ethnic groups have picked out pathways to be more successful in our society. And then you can come down from the average, and you'll find towards the bottom maybe people that have immigrated from Puerto Rico. They have not had that opportunity to come from a culture that emphasized education as much, but they're catching up. And I see that as well with black and women and men. Just in the last decade, it appears that the black women have figured this out, and you're seeing large numbers of young black women going into college and now graduate school. When I went through the MBA program, I don't remember any women of color in that program. But now I'm told that, they're everywhere. So people figure this out, and there are pathways to being successful. And sometimes there's luck involved, but a lot of times it has to do with the parents and their attitudes towards professionalism and work ethics and being involved in an education program to get that training. So I don't see any real differences between people. I've always maintained that people are more alike than different, and I've traveled. I've been to Manila and Hong Kong and to Seoul and Tokyo. I've been in Madrid. I've been in Paris. I've been in London several times. I've been in Montreal and Toronto. And every place I go, and particularly in the airports, I see families with young kids, 2 or 3, and they're walking along and they've got these little tennis shoes with the lights flashing all over the world. So what I'm seeing as just an observer is that people who like these, more casual lifestyle, and they like their kids to be, comfortable in new clothing. And I think the old customs are kind of fading away. They might be more dominant back at home, but when they're traveling and they're out, I see sort of a mass civilization developing where people are very much alike. Now, obviously, people come from different backgrounds and cultures and heritages, languages, food groups, and all of those kinds of stuff. So there are differences, but I think as humans, we're all very much alike. And we certainly deserve to be treated as humans. And what I'm seeing in the issue that we're talking about today, immigration, I'm seeing that people don't want to treat everybody as equals. So this goes right back to the whole idea of exceptionalism. Some of my students say I see the evil of exceptionalism behind every door, but it's probably true. And this is one of those cases. If you look at the trends of new immigrants into the United States, and basically we're a nation of immigrants, we've all come from some lineage where some grandparents or great-grandparents actually were from some other part of the world, and they've come in waves, depending on what was happening in their country. We saw Germans, and then we saw Polish, and then we saw Irish, and then we saw Italians. And as each group came in, particularly if they didn't have money, they would have to take jobs pretty much at the lower end of the labor scale. And so there was always resentment by the people above, saying, well, these new immigrants are taking our jobs. And there's always been conflict between one arriving group of immigrants and the ones that have been here. And then after, the years go by and they develop businesses and they develop ways to increase their income, many of them move out of New York and the East Coast and have found their way across the United States. And I said in another video that in the Des Moines schools they have children that native languages are over 100. So that just tells you that they've come from all over the world, and they're very much alike. I've had students from 40, 50 different countries. Sometimes their language skills are not the same, but I read their papers. They've had the same kind of emotions, same kind of back experiences that we have here, and they have the same kind of goals, same kind of needs and wishes. And I think that's important to understand, because what I'm seeing in today's politics is a very strong effort on the Republican side to divide, people out. They're not trying to be inclusive. They're very divisive and trying to limit immigrants and trying to make this whole immigrant issue demonized. They want people, the voters, to think that it's dangerous to have any immigrants. And what we've seen over the years are different funding levels to the immigration services, so that at times they just cut the funding so much that there could be 100,000 applicants sitting on their tables because there's nobody there to process them. A friend of mine from Liberia, who was a U.S. citizen, got married, and he thought his wife should be able to come in 6 or 9 months. It was 2.5 years. So I think we play politics in symbolic ways that really affect millions and millions of people. And what we have today is an environment of antagonism towards new people, and I don't think that's fair. In fact, I think it's a huge black eye on American culture that we're even doing this, because we're all immigrants and we all have gone through this cultural kind of immersion that you have to go through when you go into a new culture. And I've experienced it from the other end. As I was building experimental homes in the Philippines, sometimes I would be in a village where I was the first white-skinned person with blue eyes, and within a very short time I could have a dozen or 2 dozen little kids following me because they'd never seen anybody with blue eyes. And many times, not long after that, there'd be young teenage males coming along who were unemployed and very resentful of my being there. And I got into several situations that were a little bit dicey. One of them, I remember coming off a ferry boat on the southern Mindanao, and there were 2 rows of bicycle taxis, is what they're called. They're bicycles, and they have a cart behind them. And they were waiting for people to come off the boat. And I, again, was the only white-skinned person there. And so as I walked up that gauntlet of rows of tricycles, I first heard, hello, Joe, hi, Joe, here, Joe, that kind of come on. But as I passed, it turned, and it was, go home, Joe, go home, Joe, go home, Joe. The hair on the back of my neck just went right straight up. And I was, very lucky to have Emlyn along, and she got me on one, and we got out of there. But another time, I had an experience while I was there in 94, 95, 96. There was a number of cases where the rebels, there was 5 or 6 different rebel groups on Mindanao, they would take people off of buses and literally shoot them or kidnap them right off the public transport buses. So that was always in the back of my mind as, a bad dream. And one time we were going back and forth. All of my crew came from one village. We had 28, so every holiday or whatever, when we were building, they'd want to go back, and most of them went back on weekends. We were traveling on a bus, public bus, through a jungle, and all of a sudden there were guys in khaki uniforms blocking the bus, and they all had very big guns, and they were speaking in Philippine and ordered everybody off the bus. So everybody was, excitement level was very high, and for me it was very high because I didn't know what was going on. Somebody told me that all the men have to get off the bus and walk out, and my first thought was, uh-oh, this is not good. And I'm getting off the bus, and I'm looking out here. The men are lining up in front of a 4-foot-high concrete wall out in the middle of the jungle, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, this is really not good. And as I'm walking up to the wall, I'm thinking, uh-oh, this old farmer is going to buy it today. And I noticed that all of the people were facing the wall, and I'm thinking, I'm not gonna turn away from it. If I'm gonna, get shot today, I'm gonna face it right to the end. But as I got up closest to the wall, I noticed that all the men were basically taking a nature stop, relieving themselves, and my knees were shaking so bad I almost fell right there. But it was a very big relief to find out that this was the military, the Philippine military, and they were looking for weapons on buses. So that's how close it could have gone either way. It could have been, there were rebels in that area that were stopping traffic as well. So, I've experienced that kind of danger and excitement, and because of my skin color. And then our project, we were building on a mountainside, 12 homes at a time, a crew of 28. We were trying to go as fast as we could. We had one or two pretty well finished when there was a rebellion, and just a couple miles away. And this group came in and were fighting the local military over ballot boxes. And not to make a long story, but the short story is that some military people were basically trying to steal the ballot boxes so that they could get a certain woman elected who didn't even live on the island, but because so much federal funds came through the governor's office, she was from Manila and she wanted that job. And so the military was going into these villages taking the ballot boxes, and actually it was a group of priests that stood up to him first, and then the rebel group came in, and I guess 50, 60 people died, over a ballot box. So that had a lot of significance to me as I was, dealing with what was developing there, and we had to shut down. But the reason we shut down was that the National Police came to our work site and said that they had intelligence that I was being targeted by the rebel group because I was a foreign contractor and because I was an American and I was white-skinned. And so we had a vote, and the crew voted that it was a very unsafe situation. The developer that had contracted us to build these houses, he is from a Chinese background. That whole family took off. So we weren't going to get paid. We had to sell our tools, and we hawked our jewelry, everything, so we could get on buses and get out of there. And we were given only just a matter of hours to get out of there, or something terrible was going to happen to me. So I've also felt, the kind of hatred that cultures can develop, and actually the man that stood up at our wedding was kidnapped by the very same people and held for weeks. I saw him years later, and he thought for sure that he was going to be killed because he was a national politician. So, very dangerous place in the world. You can't not appreciate that we live in a very safe nation here, even though we have a lot of violence even in our country. And a lot of that has to do with racial tensions and cultural tensions and religious tensions. The Philippines have had two huge revolutions in 1980 and 1990. One of them was between the Muslims and the Catholics on these islands. The other one was between the military and everybody else. A lot of people were killed. I think on the island of Mindanao in 1980, there was probably close to 60,000 people killed on one island. And the next time around it was maybe 60 or 90,000 people. And a lot of people were killed for very, didn't have anything to do with the culture or what was going on. They would line people up, and if they had hands that didn't show any calluses, they weren't fishermen, particularly teachers and professors and bankers, these kind of people were often killed by rebel groups right there. So I'm not saying I'm an expert on this issue, but I'm telling you, I've been around. I've seen, how people interact, and cultural kinds of things go on, racial things go on. I think of myself as a feminist. I think of myself as open-minded on race. I don't see race like other people probably do. I had a friend that helped me as homecoming chairman. She was a young black student there at Morningside College, and her father was a Methodist minister. They'd always had small churches in the Dakotas, always had been in communities that were all white, and so she'd had a varied experience with the racism. And when she came to Morningside, all the girls on the floor that she lived on were coming down at 1, 2 o'clock at night just to see the black girl. So this would have been in 1966. And she couldn't get used to that. I mean, it was a very difficult situation for her. And she couldn't date, white football players because the black football players would get into fights and had all kinds of those issues. But she did a very good job on Homecoming, and I appreciate it. One day I asked her, what's it like to be, black, on a white campus? And she says, well, you walk into a room and everybody looks up and looks at you as you come in, and you think in your brain, they're looking at me because I'm green. Even though you're not, but you have that kind of screening going on in your mind that people are looking at you or reacting to you or treating you different because of your skin color, which basically was the truth. But it taught me a good lesson that it's all in the perception of people, it's all in how we've grown up and what we've experienced in the past. There's no reality to it. I mean, sure, there's differences between everybody, education and culture and language and, job experiences. There's differences. But as far as skin color goes, there's no real differences. In fact, in my class when I taught race relationships, we had one black girl and all the rest were white students. And I literally had to have the black student stand up and everybody walk past her and shake her hand because the white students, a number of them, thought for sure that black skin would feel different. It would be more leathery or more reptilian or something, I don't know. But after shaking her hand, they all agreed that her skin felt exactly like theirs. It was soft just like theirs. So you see these perceptions get mixed up in how we look at people, and it's really kind of stupid, and I've said before that stupid people can't realize that they're being stupid, and that's too bad in our culture because that's exactly what's going on the immigration issue. Now, what's happened are basically some fear numbers coming out. In 2003, I had a new textbook in sociology, intro, by a very well-known sociology author. He did very good research on everything that was in the book. And I remember in 2003, he indicated that in the United States there might be 3.5 illegal, undocumented immigrants or aliens. 3.5. 2004 was an election year, and you started to see politicians mentioning that there were 4 million undocumented, and then the mainstream picked up on that. Then in 2006, it bounced up to 6 million, and in 2008 it was 8 million, in 2010 it was 10 million, and in 2012 it became 12 million undocumented aliens here in the United States. Well, you couldn't help but see that 2004 it was 4 million, in 2006 it was 6, in 2008 it was 8, 2010. It was going up artificially. Obviously we don't have any way to take a census about undocumented aliens in the nation. I mean, we don't ask them to go out on the interstate and hold up their hands so we can count them. There's no way to know that. But if you just gave it 2 seconds of thought, you could see that was an artificial number that was being thrown out by people that wanted to create a fear factor. That there are 12 million undocumented illegal aliens in the United States. That's a huge number. That's as big as the whole New York City. Okay, my guess is that we still have 3 to 4 million, maybe 5 million undocumented aliens here, and they're here because they're connected to somebody, a family member or a job, or a lot of these people have been here 20, 30 years. And their kids are born here, and we're trying to demonize these people. We want to send them back. We want to break up their families. We want to, create all kinds of economic havoc out there by insisting that they're illegal. The only reason they're illegal is that we've passed laws that have indicated that they're undocumented, but we're not providing any way for them to get documented, okay? So it's a very circular, negative kind of situation that we've created for these people. And I think we need to look at it entirely different, okay? One, I think it's very possible for us to develop a pathway for people that are not documented, that have been here, and they're good citizens, and many of them pay taxes, even Social Security. They they've proven that they're here and being responsible citizens. Now those people that are breaking the law and pushing drugs and are in gangs, no, we don't want those here. But I think we can accommodate, we can find a pathway for all of those that have been here and have shown that they're responsible citizens. That's the only decent thing to do. It's the only just thing to do, in my opinion. And we can do it easily if we wanted to, okay? But we have this resistance coming from politics wanting to make it an issue. But it doesn't need to be an issue because of a second reason. We need them. If you really get into the numbers of where these people are and what kind of jobs they have, they're maids at hotels, they're fry cooks at fast food restaurants, they work in confinement hog centers and chicken confinement centers. They're doing the jobs that basically other people don't want to do. And so we hear this argument that they're here and they're taking jobs away, but it actually turns out that they're just taking the jobs that nobody else wants. In fact, in some states that have, gotten really nasty about this and have deported a lot of their local undocumented, all of a sudden, you have truck farms and restaurants and hotels that can't operate. If you took out several million workers from the United States, I think we would have all kinds of economic problems, and we wouldn't probably have the people that would fill those jobs. Okay? So we have misinformation and misunderstanding about a lot of these things. And the real truth of the matter is we need them. And not just for the jobs that we have today, but we need them for the jobs in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I got into this the other day, that right here in Iowa, that we have an aging population. We have half of our high school students leaving the state for jobs outside. We have half of our college graduates leaving because they can't find work here. And we have half of our counties where they're only having a few new births each year. So we have a situation in Iowa that we need workers. We need good people. And they're out there. They would like to come here. They would be very willing to work and do it legally if we would provide the opportunity to them. I saw some research, and this was at least a decade ago, that we're going to need 250,000 new people by 2020. And what are we doing? Our governor and the government here is saying we don't want anybody. We don't want these kids coming across from Mexico. We don't want these Syrians coming across from Europe. It's sort of like only thing they want are old, white, wealthy men. It's crazy. We really have an opportunity to invite people from international settings that could help our economy tremendously. And I don't see how we're going to maintain what we have today without them. And we certainly aren't going to be able to grow in the future without them, okay? Do you get it? Either you get it or you don't get it, but we need them, okay? And I saw it just so glaring, and the news reports of the Syrian refugees going to Turkey and walking up through, Greece and trying to get to places like Germany and the Netherlands. And they were following one young 17-year-old who the camera crew, whatever news service it was, they just happened to interview him, every couple days. And he was a young man, 17 years old, and he spoke very good English, almost perfect English, which caught my attention right away. But the thing that really caught my attention was that he had a mouthful of braces. And any place that, anytime you've had braces on your kids, today they cost $6,000, $8,000. So here you have a 17-year-old that obviously came from a well-to-do professional family in Syria, and his parents were in the refugee camp. So they've obviously got into some situation where they weren't comfortable staying, in the community they were. They ended up in Turkey in a refugee camp, and they wanted their son to go alone, walking, 1,000 miles on his own to have a better future. We need that kid. We need that kid in the United States. 17-year-old, and he was willing to walk thousands of miles. He's willing to take all kinds of risks. He wants to be educated. He wants to have a good job. I bet he's going to go to be an engineer or a scientist or an astronaut or a doctor that solves some problem in the future. Why in the hell aren't we inviting him to the United States? The president says we want 10,000 people, and then people say, no, we don't want any of them. Half the states have said we don't want any of them. It's absolutely asinine. We're shooting ourselves in the tail here, okay? And we did it right after 9/11. We had a situation where we had hundreds of thousands of people in Hong Kong because of the changeover from British to Chinese. And these were very wealthy people. They wanted to move someplace, and they all applied to the United States, but were turned down. Where did they end up? I saw 100,000 of them end up in Toronto, buying $400,000 homes and bringing in bank accounts that, were close to $1 million each. We shot ourselves in the butt on that deal, okay? We were stupid. We could have had immigrants from Hong Kong, and they would have added tremendously to our, it's not adding to our economy because of credit. It's actually adding to our economy because good people come here with assets. And we lost them. We lost hundreds of thousands of international students that wanted to come to universities in the United States. And where did they go? They went to Paris, they went to London, they went to Montreal because we wouldn't accept them here. We were stupid, I don't know how else you can put it, and we're still being stupid about this issue. We need people in the world, and they need us, okay? I don't know how you can get around that. We can't have billions coming. We probably can't have, large numbers beyond a few million a year, but we can structure that. We can interview them. We can make sure that they're not terrorists or militants. There's ways to do that. Making this an issue that is creating ill will around the world is not doing us any good. It's giving us a black eye. Okay, you can disagree with me. You can have your emotions. You can keep your head in the sand. But I'm telling you, immigrants are the key to our future. All right? Thank you.